Every palace is a masterclass in display. You step into the grand hall, and the sheer scale of the space demands your attention. Above, the gilded ceilings catch the light, casting a warm, golden glow over the vast, polished floors that stretch toward the horizon of the room. The air here is still, heavy, with the weight of centuries. You walk forward, and your footsteps echo against the stone, a rhythmic reminder of your own smallness in the face of such calculated majesty. It is designed to overwhelm. It is designed to impress. You assume you are seeing the heart of the kingdom, the absolute center of authority. But look closer at the way the light hits the corners of the room. Notice how the shadows gather in the seams where the walls meet the ceiling. There is a precise, rigid geometry to the construction that feels almost too deliberate. You are standing in the middle of a performance, a stage built to project power to anyone who enters. Yet, as you trace the lines of the heavy oak panels and the intricate carvings, you realize the walls are too thick, the layout too complex for mere decoration. This is not just a palace, it is a machine of statecraft. Reach out and touch the velvet. It is heavy, thick with dust, and woven with intricate, fading patterns. Behind this tapestry, the wall is not solid stone. There is a seam, a hairline fracture in the wood paneling that suggests a gap. Press your palm against the oak. It does not yield like a wall. It shifts. With a sharp, metallic click, a section of the paneling swings inward, revealing a darkness that the grand hall never intended for you to see. This is the second architecture. Step across the threshold and the air changes instantly. The temperature drops. The scent of polished wax and expensive perfume vanishes, replaced by the smell of cold, stagnant air and old parchment. This is not a space for display. It is a narrow, claustrophobic corridor designed for movement, not for sight. Look closely at the floor. The stone is worn smooth in a single, straight line, the path of those who walked here in silence. You have crossed the line between the public face of the monarchy and its private, functional core. This is the Dark Future Archive. We are here to strip away the myths that have calcified over centuries of courtly performance. Our mission is precise: to peel back the layers of stone, mortar, and propaganda that define the restricted zones of the past. History is often written by the victors, but it is preserved in the places they tried to hide. We do not rely on the gilded narratives. Instead, we examine the structural evidence, the surviving blueprints, the archaeological fragments, and the cold, unvarnished records. Every room we uncover is a piece of a larger, more complex machine. We are not just looking at architecture. We are looking at the mechanics of control. By investigating these spaces, we force the silent walls to speak. We will trace the narrow passages to understand how power was actually exercised. Prepare to look past the surface. We are entering the interior world, where the true history of authority remains locked away. Why would a ruler demand a room that did not appear on any public plan? The logic is cold and calculated. A palace was a stage, but a stage requires a backstage to function. The official blueprints were documents of propaganda designed to impress visitors and project an image of total transparency. But the reality of rule required a different geometry. A king or an emperor needed spaces that existed outside the gaze of the court. These rooms were not merely architectural anomalies, they were the essential components of a machine built for survival. Consider the discrepancy between the public map and the physical structure. The architect drew the grand halls for the public to see, but the master builder carved the hidden corridors for the monarch to use. Every unlisted door, every narrow stairwell, and every concealed archive served a singular purpose: to bypass the scrutiny of the palace inhabitants. If it could not be monitored, it could not be compromised. This was the architectural logic of the forbidden. Survival in a royal court was a game of constant, lethal proximity. The monarch lived surrounded by advisors, rivals, and servants. To rule was to be watched, and to be watched was to be vulnerable. This is why the buffer zone was not a luxury. The hidden rooms functioned as a sanctuary from the suffocating scrutiny of the palace. By retreating into these unmapped spaces, the ruler could reset the terms of engagement. These chambers provided the distance required to think, to plan, and to isolate the self. Think of the palace as a pressure cooker. The hidden rooms were the valves that allowed the monarch to release that pressure. Within these walls, the ruler could verify intelligence, confirm loyalties, and store the secrets that kept the dynasty alive. Without these hidden zones, the monarch would have been entirely exposed. These rooms provided the only place where the ruler could exist without a mask. In the silence of these chambers, the state was not just governed, it was protected from the very people who sought to influence its direction. Contrast the public throne room with the private council chamber to understand the true nature of authority. In the throne room, the monarch is a performer. Every gesture is calculated, every word is scripted, and every movement is designed to project an image of divine stability. The architecture here is meant to dwarf the individual, to make the visitor feel small, and to reinforce the hierarchy of the state. But step behind the paneling, into the hidden council room, and the performance ends. Here, the air is thick with the scent of ink and old parchment. The grand gilded furniture is replaced by heavy, functional tables. The monarch is no longer a symbol. They are a strategist. In this space, the reality of the state is negotiated. Decisions are made not for the applause of the court, but for the survival of the crown. The council room is where the mask of the ruler is discarded. The architecture dictates this shift. The throne room is a place of light, meant to be seen. The council room is a place of shadow and enclosure. The monarch needs both, the stage to maintain the illusion, and the hidden chamber to ensure the machine keeps running. As centuries passed, the palace evolved into a sophisticated machine of surveillance. Architects were no longer just building for grandeur, they were building for information control. The goal was to filter the gaze of the court, ensuring that the monarch saw everything while remaining unseen. This was a deliberate evolution of space. Designers began to craft layouts that prioritized restricted sightlines, creating a hierarchy of knowledge. If you were a visitor, the architecture guided your eyes toward the spectacle, keeping you focused on the surface. If you were part of the inner circle, the building opened up, revealing secondary layers of movement. This was not accidental. By controlling who could look into specific corridors or peer through hidden galleries, the ruler effectively determined who possessed the truth. The palace became a physical manifestation of an information filter. Those who could navigate the hidden zones held the keys to the kingdom. The architecture ensured that the monarch remained the ultimate observer, while the rest of the court was forced to play a game where they were constantly watched. Beyond the grand halls lay a secondary world of movement, invisible to the common observer. To maintain absolute control, the palace required a network of veins that bypassed the public eye. This was achieved through the art of the disguised entrance. A section of wall paneling would pivot on a hidden hinge with a single, silent push. These were not doors in the traditional sense. They were seamless breaks in the architecture. Once inside, you entered the narrow servant passages. These corridors were intentionally cramped, designed to minimize space and maximize speed. The air here was stale, and the walls were often bare brick. In this darkness, the elite moved like ghosts. They could travel from the private chambers to the kitchens or archives without ever crossing a public threshold. A servant could deliver a message, or a conspirator could vanish, all while the court remained oblivious just inches away on the other side of the wall. The architecture did not just house the monarchy. It actively facilitated their ability to move unseen through their own domain. Above the grand halls, hidden behind ornate grilles and velvet-lined slits, lay the concealed galleries. These were the eyes of the palace. From these elevated, darkened perches, the elite could peer down into the heart of the court without ever revealing their presence. The architecture here was designed for total detachment. You could stand in the shadows of a gallery, listening to the murmurs of the nobility below, while remaining completely isolated from the light and sound of the room. The floorboards were padded to absorb the slightest vibration, and the sightlines were angled to provide a panoramic view of every interaction. this was not merely observation. It was a form of psychological warfare. The courtiers below knew they were in a palace, but they never knew if they were being watched. This uncertainty created a pervasive sense of dread. A king or a queen could monitor their subjects from the safety of these hidden perches, gathering intelligence while the target remained unaware of the scrutiny. The galleries were the ultimate manifestation of the palace as a machine of control. In these silent, elevated spaces, the monarch held the advantage of the unseen. The palace was not merely a structure of stone. It was a sophisticated engine of surveillance. Once the elite mastered the art of the hidden gallery, they began to refine the architecture itself into a tool for constant monitoring. Architects were commissioned to design rooms with specific acoustic properties, where the geometry of the ceiling and the placement of vents acted as a funnel for sound. A whisper uttered in the corner of a grand ballroom could be carried through concealed ducts directly to the ear of a listener in a private chamber above. This was the ultimate evolution of the palace as a machine. Every archway, every alcove, and every decorative molding served a secondary, tactical purpose. Sight lines were calculated with mathematical precision, ensuring that no corner of the public space remained truly private. The monarch did not need to be present to exert control. The building itself performed the act of watching. By embedding these sensors into the very mortar, the state turned the palace into an automated system of intelligence gathering. Beyond the reach of the galleries and the acoustic traps lay the true heart of the palace, the archives. If the galleries were the eyes of the state, these chambers were its memory. Tucked deep within the foundation, accessible only through narrow, reinforced doors, these rooms held the records that defined the kingdom. Here, the walls were lined with heavy wooden shelving, packed tight with scrolls and leather-bound ledgers. These were not merely books, they were the blueprints of power. Each shelf contained the detailed bloodlines of every noble family, documenting every marriage, every debt, and every secret indiscretion. The air in these rooms was stagnant, thick with the scent of drying ink and aging parchment. It was a place where time stood still, yet the information stored within was perpetually active. A single page detailing a forgotten lineage could invalidate a claim to the throne, or trigger a political purge. This was the archive of leverage, where the monarch kept the currency of their authority. The documents were not merely stored, they were woven into the fabric of the palace. Architects designed hollow panels and false floors specifically to house sensitive intelligence, turning the very walls into a vault of leverage. These were the papers that dictated the rise and fall of ministers, containing the precise details of hidden debts and illicit alliances. For the monarch, these documents represented the true currency of power, far more valuable than gold or land. Access to this information was strictly controlled, often requiring a series of keys and mechanical triggers hidden in plain sight. A single ledger could contain the evidence needed to dismantle a rival faction in an afternoon. This was the weight of authority made manifest in ink and seal. The palace functioned as a living safe, where every stone and timber was tasked with protecting the secrets that kept the monarchy secure. By embedding these records into the structure of the home, the crown transformed the palace into a weapon, ensuring the history of the realm was held firmly. Beyond the reach of political ledgers lay a different kind of restricted zone, the chambers of ritual. These spaces were not designed for the storage of paper, but for the performance of acts that required total isolation from the public eye. Here, the sacred and the profane collided in the dark. The architecture shifted to accommodate these needs, featuring thick, sound-dampened walls, heavy, iron-bound doors that locked from the inside. These rooms were often positioned at the highest or lowest points of the palace. Inside, the atmosphere was distinct, heavy with the scent of burning oils and metallic incense. The design was deliberate. In these chambers, the monarch engaged in private ceremonies that blurred the line between state duty and personal devotion. The space itself was a tool of transformation, allowing the ruler to step out of the role of a political figure and into a more primal state. They represent the final, most guarded layer of existence, where the true nature of authority was tested and hidden away. To understand these hidden zones, we must move past the legends and look at the stone itself. Centuries of myth have obscured the reality of palace life, turning functional security into tales of ghosts and grand conspiracies. Archaeology provides the necessary lens to separate fact from fiction. By examining surviving blueprints and comparing them to the physical remains, researchers have uncovered deep discrepancies. A wall that appears solid on a 17th century floor plan often reveals a hollow cavity when scanned with modern ground-penetrating radar. These voids represent the physical evidence of restricted access. We look at the mortar joints, the wear patterns on hidden staircases, and the chemical composition of dust found in sealed chambers. Each piece of data acts as a witness to the past. The myth suggests secret tunnels spanning miles, but the evidence shows something more practical: narrow, reinforced corridors designed to move a single person. By relying on this empirical data, we stop guessing about the nature of power and start measuring it. We see the palace as a dynamic machine of control. If stone provides the frame, the court records provide the pulse. We turn now to the ledgers, diaries, and administrative logs that survived the centuries. These documents offer a glimpse into the daily lives of those who ruled from the shadows. Often, the most significant entries are not found in the public proclamations, but in the mundane, fragmented notes of personal secretaries and chamberlains. We piece together the movements of the monarch by tracking the timing of candle purchases, the delivery of food to restricted corridors, and the sudden, unexplained absences from public view. These records reveal a life lived in two distinct registers. One was the performative existence of the court, documented for posterity to see. The other was the quiet, calculated reality of the hidden chambers. We see the monarch retreating from the grand halls at irregular hours, entering spaces that appear on no official map. The records describe the movement of sensitive documents, the hushed arrivals of advisors through servant passages, and the long, solitary hours spent in rooms designed for absolute silence. By cross-referencing these logs with the physical layout of the palace, we reconstruct the rhythm of power. We see how the monarch managed the state not from the throne, but from the periphery. Beyond the logistics of power, these hidden spaces reveal a deeper, more volatile truth. The palace was not merely a seat of government, it was a fortress of profound anxiety. Every corridor was designed with the constant, gnawing fear of betrayal. When we examine the placement of these secret rooms, we see a pattern of defensive geometry. They were positioned to watch the watchers. The monarch lived in a state of perpetual surveillance, where even the most trusted advisor was a potential threat. The walls were thick, the doors were reinforced with iron, and the windows were narrow slits that offered a view of the courtyard without exposing the occupant. This was an architecture of suspicion. Every creak of a floorboard in the dead of night became a signal of danger. The obsession with rank was not just about prestige. It was a mechanism to identify who could be trusted and who was an intruder. We see this in the way rooms were partitioned, creating layers of security that forced visitors to pass through multiple checkpoints before reaching the inner sanctum. The palace was a machine built to isolate the ruler. In these silent, windowless chambers, the fear of assassination and the dread of internal coups were baked into the very mortar. The grandest halls were a facade. Within the palace, rank was not an abstract concept. It was a physical boundary. The architecture enforced a rigid hierarchy that dictated every movement through the hidden corridors. A courtier's status was measured by how deep they could penetrate into the palace interior. The further one moved from the public halls, the more restricted the space became. Narrow passages were designed to funnel individuals into specific zones, ensuring that no one could bypass the checkpoints of social standing. We see this in the varying widths of the corridors and the placement of secondary doors that only opened for those of a certain title. The obsession with rank created a suffocating environment where every interaction was monitored by the very walls themselves. This layout ensured that the monarch was always shielded by layers of subordinates. The physical design of these hidden spaces functioned as a filter, separating the essential from the expendable. It was a labyrinth of status, where the walls were built to ensure that currency remained strictly regulated. The paranoia of the monarch was not merely a state of mind. It was a blueprint for construction. Architects were tasked with translating the fear of betrayal into solid stone and mortar. This resulted in a structural obsession with concealment that defined the very foundation of the palace. We find evidence of this in the double-layered walls, where hollow voids were deliberately left between chambers to house listeners. These were not structural necessities. They were defensive weapons. Every room was designed with an exit that led to nowhere. The masonry itself tells a story of deep-seated distrust. In some palaces, the thickness of the stone barriers increased. This was architecture as a shield, built to withstand not just external sieges, but the internal threat of the court. The walls were never just boundaries. They were the physical embodiment of a life lived in constant anticipation of an attack. The true terror of the palace was not the threat of physical violence, but the constant, invisible sensation of being watched. Every inhabitant lived under the weight of an unseen gaze that permeated the hidden architecture. Architects integrated narrow, concealed galleries into the walls, allowing the elite to observe the grand halls without ever revealing their presence. These were not merely corridors. They were optical instruments of surveillance. A courtier walking through a gallery might feel the prickle of eyes on their back, yet turn to find only cold, unyielding stone. This was the genius of the design. The monarch did not need to be present to exert control. The mere possibility of being observed from behind a tapestry or through a disguised slit in the paneling forced every individual to perform. The architecture created a panopticon where the boundary between the public sphere and the private shadow dissolved. We must now confront the ultimate deception of the royal residence. For centuries, the grand halls and gilded ceilings have been interpreted as monuments to the glory of the state, yet this is a fundamental misreading of intent. The palace was never designed to reveal the full extent of power. It was engineered to mask it. Every ornate detail, every sprawling gallery, and every meticulously polished floor served as a deliberate distraction, drawing the eye away from the true machinery of control. The grander the public display, the more vital the secret it was intended to obscure. We see the truth when we strip away the myth. The palace functioned as a grand theater where the monarch performed for the masses, while the real business of authority occurred in the shadows, far removed from the public eye. Power was not meant to be seen. It was meant to be felt through its absence. By creating a facade of accessibility, the monarchy could effectively hide the mechanisms by which they maintained absolute dominion. The architecture did not invite the visitor to understand the ruler. It invited them to admire the illusion. As we peel back these final layers, the realization is stark. The most impressive palaces were not mirrors of power, but veils. They were designed to ensure that the true weight of the throne remained inaccessible, buried behind the very beauty that the world was encouraged to celebrate. Now, we arrive at the final, most chilling truth of the royal structure. If the palace was a machine of control, then its heart was a void. There existed a room that defied every architectural plan and every ceremonial record. It was the space absent from the guest list, inaccessible to the highest-ranking courtier, and erased from the collective memory of the dynasty. While the world looked toward the throne room, the true decisions of the state were forged in this phantom chamber. It was not a place of display, but a place of absolute, unmonitored command. Imagine a room that does not appear on any blueprint, hidden within the thickest foundations of the palace. No visitor ever crossed its threshold. No servant ever cleaned its floors. It was the ultimate buffer, a vacuum where the monarch could exist outside the constraints of the court. This was not merely a private office. It was the silent engine of the monarchy. By keeping this room absent from all public knowledge, the ruler ensured that the source of their power remained untouchable. It was the most important room in the palace, precisely because it did not exist for anyone but the one who held the crown. In the silence of this non-space, the true history of the realm was written. We must now confront the most calculated act of the monarchy, the systematic destruction of memory. These hidden chambers were not merely locked, they were scrubbed from existence. Architects who designed these voids were often silenced, and the blueprints were burned the moment the mortar dried. This was not a failure of record-keeping. It was a survival strategy. To protect the core of the dynasty, the monarch required a space that could not be traced, mapped, or recalled by any living subject. When a ruler stepped into these shadows, they effectively ceased to exist in the public record. The shock lies in the realization that the palace was designed to be forgotten. Every generation of courtiers walked past walls that held the most critical secrets of the realm, never knowing that the space behind them had been intentionally erased from the collective consciousness. It was a ghost architecture, built to vanish. By ensuring that these rooms left no footprint in history, the dynasty created a permanent blind spot in the narrative of power. They understood that to be truly untouchable, one must be unremembered. We are left with the chilling evidence of a void where a throne should have been, proving that the most profound authority was the kind that left no trace behind. The final realization is this: the palace was never a home. It was a machine of total architectural control. Every corridor, every locked door, and every hidden archive functioned as a gear in a vast, cold apparatus designed to dictate the human spirit. The walls did more than store secrets. They shaped the behavior of everyone who walked within them. By controlling access to light, to space, and to the truth, the monarchy turned the building into a cage of perception. You move through the grand halls, and you are being managed. You stand in the throne room, and you are being directed. The architecture enforced a hierarchy that felt as natural as the stone itself, yet it was entirely manufactured. This was the ultimate triumph of the crown, to build a structure so imposing that the subjects policed their own thoughts. The palace was a cage that convinced the bird it was a castle, and in that deception, the monarchy found its absolute power. We are left with the silence. It is a heavy, pressurized silence that fills the gaps where the walls meet and the corridors end. This is not the absence of sound, but the presence of a history that refuses to be spoken. These hidden spaces act as a vault for the true narrative of power, a record that was never intended for the light of day. While the grand halls were designed to project an image of stability and divine right, these secret chambers held the reality of the state, the betrayals, the brutal negotiations, and the cold calculations that kept the crown in place. The history of authority is not written in the gilded ceilings or the polished floors. It is locked in the mortar of these forgotten zones. It waits in the darkness, preserved by the very isolation that once protected the monarch. We have peeled back the layers of stone, but the core remains protected. The true history of power is not lost. It is merely waiting. It is held in a state of permanent suspension, locked away from the public gaze, guarded by the architecture of secrecy. As we stand at the threshold, we recognize the palace was a container for a truth, waiting for the light to finally find it. Now, strip away the gilding. Look past the polished marble and the velvet drapes. Beneath the veneer of royal splendor lies the raw, jagged truth of authority. These palaces were not merely homes. They were slaughterhouses of ambition, built upon the bones of those who dared to challenge the crown. The mortar that holds these stones together was mixed with the sweat of the coerced and the blood of the silenced. Every hidden corridor served a singular dark purpose: to isolate the monarch from the consequences of their own commands. This is the dark truth of power. It requires a physical separation from the human reality it governs. The beauty you admire was a calculated distraction, a visual narcotic designed to blind the court to the rot festering behind the walls. We see the monarch not as a figure of grace, but as a prisoner of their own fortress, trapped in a cycle of paranoia and cold-blooded preservation. The architecture did not protect the kingdom. It protected the secret of the crown's fragility. When you finally confront the reality of these hidden chambers, the grandeur vanishes. The palace is not a monument to greatness, but a tomb for the conscience of the state. The walls have stopped speaking, yet the questions remain. We have walked the narrow passages and stood in the cold, windowless rooms, where the weight of a kingdom was once decided. But the architecture of control is vast, and we have only brushed the surface of its reach. These spaces are not merely ruins of a bygone era. They are active, silent witnesses to the mechanics of power. They wait for the light of the archive to pierce the gloom, to translate the silence into a record that can finally be understood. We leave these chambers now, but the investigation does not end here. Every stone, every sealed door, and every forgotten document holds a fragment of a larger, darker story that the monarchy spent centuries trying to erase. The mystery is not that these rooms existed, but that they were allowed to remain hidden for so long. As you turn away from these grand facades, remember that the most significant history is often the kind that is deliberately kept out of sight. The archive is open, the light is moving, and the truth is still waiting in the dark. Authority is not found in the crown or the throne, but in the distance between the ruler and the ruled. We have mapped that distance through the architecture of the forbidden, tracing the lines of power that were drawn in stone and silence. These hidden rooms were the crucibles where the state was forged, far from the gaze of the masses. By examining them, we strip away the myth of the benevolent monarch and reveal the cold, calculating machine of survival beneath. The palace was never a home. It was a fortress of secrets, designed to ensure that the true nature of command remained forever inaccessible. We are left with a sobering realization. The grandest structures of history were built to hide the very things that define them. The rooms we were never meant to see are the only ones that tell the truth. As we step back from the threshold, the silence of these corridors feels heavier, charged with the echoes of decisions that shaped our world. Power is a shadow that seeks the dark. The grand halls are empty now. The footsteps of the past have faded, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding stone. Look closely at the way the light dies in the corners of these rooms. It does not simply vanish. It is absorbed by the walls, trapped in the porous mortar that witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties. These spaces hold a weight that transcends time. Even without the presence of the monarch, the architecture continues to exert its influence, a silent, lingering pressure that refuses to dissipate. Every shadow cast across the floor is a reminder of the secrets that were never spoken aloud. The air here is thick with the residue of command, a stillness so profound it feels like a physical barrier. We have reached the end of our survey, yet the palace remains, a vast, complex machine of concealment that has outlived its masters. The echoes of hidden power still resonate in these corridors, vibrating through the dust and the dark. What was once a tool for survival has become a monument to the paranoia that defined an era. As the final light dims, the truth of the monarchy remains locked in the silence of the unseen. The archive closes, but the silence of the palace continues to speak.